I remember watching him place Sean over his right shoulder, stroking his back and the top of his head while starting to whisper all of the things the two of them did together that day as he was carrying Sean to his bed. He did this in the softest and most delicate of ways, not only in the way he whispered, but in the delicacy and grace of his movements. I clearly remember his tonality and phrasing. By the time they reached the bed, he would gently lay Sean down, and his words became increasingly hypnotic. It was his way of putting a baby to sleep, instead of saying, "Get away from the television." It did not surprise me when I first heard the rough mix of Double Fantasy and the song Beautiful Boy. The monster's gone, he's on the run, and your daddy is here. All the things about house husbandry that others mocked were to John the most important and revolutionary thing he ever did. Raising a child came before all else. Now, it just so happens that Yoko has a head for business. Yoko came from a long lineage of Japanese bankers that could have put the Beatles to shame financially. But the concept of a man, a father, a husband, raising the child while the wife gets up in the morning and goes to work and brings home the bacon was unheard of. It was so radical, it could fall under the category of an anthropological Darwinian evolutionary reversal of roles. It was that potent. How many couples did that and spoke of the joys of the experience publicly? And the fact is that now, 30 years later, when it's become a little more commonplace, not a lot, but a little more, it tends to only slightly negate what a revolutionary act that was. John delighted in the experience, and it was one of the reasons between 1975 and 1980 that he did not make public utterances, and why he was not seen frequently, and why he did not do a lot of interviews. It was time to raise Sean. Time to play. Time for Sean's feeding. There were times when I would phone and he would say, "Would you call me later? I'm about to bathe Sean." John was raised by his Aunt Mimi, and he wrote things down on scraps of paper or did crayon drawings or doodles. They may just have been scribbles on the backs of pieces of paper. At the time, it didn't seem terribly important. He was a kid, and she innocently tossed most of them away. Years later, after he became a father, he would go on about things like that for hours. Can you believe she would do that? Every single thing that Sean draws or touches, or if he makes a paint mark on a napkin, I save it. I keep it. It's Sean. It's part of him. Sean's recollections of his father, of course, are sketchy. It's a peculiar feeling when he occasionally asks me a specific question about his father, something he read or heard. They shared only 60 months together. I understand for Sean, much of it must be somewhat of a blur. For John, it defined his life. On one occasion, a courier appeared with a ticket for me. I traveled with them to Kurosawa, Japan, where we stayed at the Mampei Hotel, a magnificent traditional place, until the numerologist said it was time to leave. We were directed to Tokyo, where we stopped and remained in the presidential suite at the Hotel Okura for an extended stay. The suite was so large, John and I played soccer in the living room. For security reasons, you take the elevator from the lobby, and with the right pass key, it would go up and open into the living room of the suite. One night, John and I were just sitting in the room. I don't remember where Yoko or Sean was. We had ordered room service and may have had a drink or two. It was a dark, cavernous space and silent. Outside one of the floor-to-ceiling windows was an exact replica of the Eiffel Tower, pre-Las Vegas. The Japanese liked that. We had just come from the ancient Montpellier Hotel. It was complete culture shock returning to the western part of the Eastern world. Around 10 o'clock that night, I was sitting on the couch and John was strumming his acoustic guitar. I was staring out at the Eiffel Tower and just listening to him play. He was a marvelous acoustic guitar player, even when he was just tinkering. Suddenly, the elevator door opened. I presumed Yoko had returned, but instead, a middle-aged Japanese couple who neither of us had seen before walked down the hallway and entered the dimly lit room. They noticed that there was a man playing guitar and another man seated near a table. There were a few chairs and tables in the spacious but modestly decorated room. The two of them looked around, observing the tatami mats and expansively decorated shojis, as well as the inexplicable presence of a soccer ball in the corner of the cavernous room. They spoke softly in Japanese and seemed to want to listen to the solo music for a few minutes. I immediately understood what was happening. They were not waiting for Yoko. They had not been buzzed up. Somehow the elevator went to the wrong floor, and they thought that they were in a restaurant or lounge on the top floor of the Hotel Okura. After about 10 or 15 minutes passed, I noticed that they were turning their heads, waiting some kind of server to ask if they wanted cocktails. I caught a glimpse of John, who looked back at me with a grin that simply said, "Go with it, this is cool." He played the song "Jealous Guy" in English. It was beautiful. I loved it. After 5 or so minutes, the Japanese couple, clearly dissatisfied with the service and not able to understand the musician, got up and left. And when the elevator door closed, John and I just rolled on the floor. It was the only time I think he ever performed for a private party of 2. They did not leave a tip.